Okay, I guess I can start. All right, I'm admitting people in as they come. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kat Thompson. Conscious activism. When Gary requested that or asked if I was available to do this session today, I was a little perplexed and stumped. I was like, do I want to take that on? Because it's a volatile time right now, and people can be triggered very quickly by the least kind of a thing. So I thought about it for a little bit, and then I said, I will take this on. I would like to see what comes out of my own psyche when I sit down and put this together. So over the week that I've had to really think about this and make notes and ask questions and write things down, I feel that I've come up with a fairly good description of what conscious activism is from my perspective, which is based on emotional intelligence and personal power and co-creation. So conscious is being aware, and not just aware of your surroundings, but aware of your own triggers and your reactions and what punches you, what makes you react to something, what makes you agitated or anxious or happy or joyful. It's really knowing the inner self. That's why every mystery school that's ever been starts with know thyself, right? Because if you don't know yourself, it's very hard to have personal power to enact change in the world. So conscious is something that I'm going to keep circling back to here. Activism, the definition of activism is the doctrine or practice of vigorous action or involvement as a means of achieving political or other goals, like a protest or a demonstration. But activism is also a philosophy. It's a theory that the essence of reality is pure activity, especially spiritual activity. I found that really interesting, that there's a theory of activism that reality is simply pure activity. Not sure that I agree with it, but it was interesting to see that. And the third definition of activism was a theory that the relationship between the mind and the objects of perception depends upon self-awareness. That was the definition that really grabbed me. So it's like, yes, the relationship between what we perceive, how we perceive, the story we're telling ourselves, and the object of the perception that we're telling the story about, the object of what it is that we're focused on, depends on our self-awareness. For those of you who are familiar with quantum physics, they have found that on the tiniest quantum level of reality, everything is responsive to the observer's intent and perception, which means that reality is simply this big soup of energy that becomes whatever you're focused on, whatever you believe it to be. And that's an interesting thing that I'll come back to in this current political situation, because I see so many people screaming and pointing fingers that I have nothing to do with this. This is not about me. This is against everything I believe in. And yet, if we're not having a reaction to something, we're not invested in it. If we have a reaction to something, we have energy invested in it. And that's what I'm going to ask you to look at today. So moving along to, in order to be fully conscious, there are two things that we need to understand: co-creation and personal power. Co-creation is the understanding that anything that happens to me or in my experience, I have co-created. I have said yes to that. Whether I've done it consciously or unconsciously, I have said yes to that. And so let me give you an example of how you would be unconsciously saying yes to that. If as a child you had an experience that was traumatic, let's say your parents fought about money and you were frightened by their fighting because there was a lot of bitterness and anger and angry words that came out, and the energy was frightening to you. You may have taken in a belief as a young child that money is scarce and there will always be anger around the lack of it. And then that gets buried into our subconscious, so we're not really aware of it. But as our life goes on, our personal power says, listen, we're never going to be thriving financially as long as we're carrying this belief system. So I'm going to keep bringing situations to you to show you what you believe so that you can find that belief, bring it out, shake it off, put it in the light and go, I'm not 5 years old anymore. And there is no scarcity of money. And I'm totally able to create as much, wealth and abundance as I need. So this is how we co-create from the subconscious. Of course, co-creating from the conscious is when we say, I'm going to do this, and then you do it, you put it into action. So it's important to understand that you have an equal, if not more, amount of co-creative energy going out into the world subconsciously as you do consciously. And that's important to understand when you are trying to fight something that you feel is wrong, is you have to ask yourself, why am I in this fight? Why am I drawn to this fight in particular? What is it that's triggering me about this fight? Okay, so I'm going to go through. That's why if you would like a copy of this, I actually have this listed, like, here's what you can do, here's the questions to ask yourself, and so on and so forth. So, personal responsibility, that's the second thing besides co-creation. What is personal responsibility? Personal responsibility, let me see if I have a really good explanation of that. Personal power, sorry. Personal power is our inherent ability to survive. Every single one of us was born with enough power to survive. Now, what's interesting is that we have been hypnotized into thinking that survival is shameful. If you're simply surviving, you're not doing enough. You're not adequate. You don't have enough drive. You're being lazy, whatever. When did the ability to survive become negative, become something that was frowned upon, or that we should feel ashamed of? Your body knows and has enough power at any given moment to give you what you need in that moment to survive. Okay? And so there's a difference between surviving and having everything that you think you want, right? Having a house, having a cabin, having a boat, having vacations twice a year, blah, blah, blah. That is not a need. That's not a survival need. The survival need is, do you have a roof over your head? Do you have food in your belly? Do you have relationships? Those are your survival needs. And every one of us is born knowing how to have those at every given moment. So we have to rethink the hypnotism that we've been involved in that says that that's not enough, that you're not a good enough person, or you don't have enough value in the culture unless you're constantly striving for more. And this is part of why we're in this terrible imbalance with our planet right now, is that we have forgotten that survival can be so easy and relaxing. When I was 45, I sold everything and drove to Mexico, and I lived in a hut for 5 years. And I had just what I could carry in my tiny little 2-seater car. So I didn't have very many clothes. I had only 2 pairs of shoes, which for a woman in America, 2 pairs of shoes, oh my God. And life was really simple. And I was able to live very frugally on not very much money. And it healed my heart because I understood then that I would always have the ability to live simply. And it was my job to make sure that I was satisfied with that. So that was a lot of my work when I lived in Mexico, was that self-awareness of, why do you want more? And why is it that every time you feel insecure, you want to go buy something? And why? Like, just really examining all those things and finding the beliefs that were attached to those feelings so that I could change them and say, I don't really think I need to believe that anymore. Or, that didn't really serve me very well, or whatever. So personal power is something that you're born with, and you will always have enough to survive. How do you get additional personal power so that you can thrive? Well, that is a good question. So first I'm going to talk about how we give our personal power away. Okay. We give our personal power away, and this is another one of the ways that we're hypnotized. We are told that we don't have enough personal power to keep ourselves safe. So from the time we were children, we are taught to give over our personal power to somebody else to take care of us, to authority. Authority has the final word because we're not smart enough, or we're not old enough, or we're not intelligent enough to make decisions that would help us to survive, right? We'll make stupid decisions that will kill us or kill somebody around us. So at a very early age, and in particularly in modern culture, we don't let children make mistakes because we're too afraid of the consequences. And therefore, they never really learn what they're capable of. So they continue to look outside of themselves to authority. And that's how we give our personal power away, is we give our personal power away every time we tell an authority figure, yes, you know better than me, tell me what to do. Okay, that's how the cultures that are based on, well, let's say Western culture is absolutely based on colonialism. And we have been colonized in our bodies, in our spirit, in our minds by these beliefs that we're not smart enough to thrive on our own, that we need outside authority to take care of us. We need insurance companies. We need police departments. We need medical doctors. We need all of these things because we don't have the personal power to keep ourselves healthy, to keep ourselves safe, and to keep ourselves abundant. Okay, that's a myth. That's a hypnotism. And I'm going to ask every one of you to really examine what you know, what you believe about that. And the way that I will ask you to do that is a series of questions. They are, what are you, so just pick one thing that you have a strong reaction about, especially in today's current political climate. Find one thing that you're just like, that really trips my trigger. What are you most afraid of about that? And this is self-awareness. So I encourage you to keep a journal. Like, what am I most afraid of? Well, I'm afraid that if this happens, then this will happen, and blah, blah, blah. And I'll end up living in my car, and my kids won't have a home, and blah, blah, blah. And just get to the heart of your fear. Because when fear is written down, it loses about 80% of its power. Fear out here can overwhelm and kill you. I mean, it can just sap your energy. So write it down, What does my fear say? My fear says this. My fear says this. My fear says this. So once you identify your fear, why are you afraid of that? That's another good question, because fears don't just show up. There's a why behind that. So why are you afraid of that? Okay. Why are you afraid of that? And then the third question is, what proof do you have that this is a thing to fear? Now, proof does not mean somebody else's experience. Proof doesn't mean a story that somebody else posted on Facebook. Proof is your personal experience with it. I cannot stress this enough, that you have only power in your life in your own experience. And social media is creating a huge wave of chaotic fear, because on social media, we are reading other people's experiences and taking them in as our own. And we have absolutely no power to impact or change that story because it isn't ours. So you have to say, what proof do I have that that is a thing to fear based on your own personal experience? And if you can't find that, keep looking, because there will be an event or a memory or something that will show up in from your subconscious. Maybe when you're laying there in the morning half asleep, and it'll come into your head and you'll be like, oh my goodness, that's why I believed that this was a thing to fear, because of that experience I had when I was 12. Okay, so those are the three questions. What am I afraid of? Why am I afraid of it? And what proof do I have that that is something to be feared? And when you can get there, you now have the opportunity to say, in the moment today, is that still true? In the moment today, am I safe? In the moment today, do I have everything I need right now I used to be consumed by terror, and it was always about money. And when I first started doing this work back in the mid 90s, I kept a journal every day where I would write, like, what am I afraid of today? What does my fear say? Not what am I afraid of, but what does my fear say? And my fear over and over and over and over and over again was that I would not have enough personal power to pay my bills, that I wouldn't, and I realized that my fear was always in the future. I don't have the money to pay that bill next week. What am I going to do? I was a freelancer. So money was very, like, sometimes I would be rolling in the dough and sometimes I'd have nothing. And so it was those times when I had nothing, the checks hadn't come in, or I hadn't gotten a job for a while, then my fear would go into high gear. You're not going to have enough to pay the bill. You're going to go bankrupt. You're going to end up living in your car. You're going to be homeless, blah, 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 blah. You know, there was this whole dialogue. And so I just kept writing that dialogue down. And I would end each session by saying to myself, what do you need today that you don't have? What do you need right now that you don't have? And the answer was always nothing. I had everything I needed right then. Maybe the bill had to be paid tomorrow and I didn't have the money, but right then there was nothing that needed to be changed. And when I could get to that place and trust and relax, the money always showed up. Always, always, always. And so I learned to trust my own process, because it showed me over and over again that that was where my personal power came from, was by staying with my process and trusting it and digging deep. Okay, here's how we waste personal power. Social media, holy crap. Social media is full of people screaming, raging, yelling, pointing fingers, blaming, shaming, taunting, mocking, gleefully being overjoyed at somebody else's misfortune. I can't do it anymore. I've had to stop because it was making me ill, physically ill, to participate in those, you know, even just reading them caused me to have these. So I just stopped. And what I found was that it helped me to define, where is my personal power and where is my conscious activism in my own life right now? And I realized that it was one-to-one conversations were the only place that I was going to make any difference. So I started seeking out people who had different perspectives than I did. And here's one of the things that I've learned. There is a kernel of truth in every single person's belief. The right says the left is crazy. The left says the right is crazy. People say, oh, anybody who's voting for Trump is a racist. I have found that that's not true. I have gone out and found Trump supporters as well as Biden supporters and talked to both of them and found that there's a kernel of truth in everything, but the story that they're telling themselves is built on a whole lot of context that hasn't ever been in their personal experience, isn't in their personal experience, and therefore leaves them feeling helpless. So it's hard to be an activist if the story that you're involved in is about blaming somebody else. There's no way that we can move through that, none. You have to be able to find the kernel of truth in the other person's story to be able to start a bridge and build a dialogue, okay? So the first thing we have to do is find out what our own fears are and what our triggers are. Now, a trigger is something, it can be something that somebody posts on Facebook, it can be something you've seen on TV, it can be a headline you read in the newspaper, something you overhear somebody say, or something that somebody says to you. A trigger is something that causes an emotional reaction. When you have an emotional reaction, you have an investment of energy right there. That's an emotional reaction, says, I have an investment of energy here. Now, how do you have an emotional investment of energy in, let's say, fracking? If you're absolutely anti-fracking and it makes you so angry to see the water being polluted as it is from fracking, you would scream at me and say, I'm not invested in fracking. You are. You know how? The places you've given up your personal power to authority are then used for authorities' best interests, not for yours. And this is why we're so frustrated as a culture, because we gave our personal power over to other people to do the right thing for us. And instead, they're using it for whatever they want. So clearly, our political system no longer is going to work unless we change how we deal with personal power and how we ask our government to behave. I used to say back in the 80s, if you don't want government in your life, then govern yourself. And this was before I even did any of this work that I now am an expert in emotional intelligence. But I knew at my heart that if I didn't govern myself, I would be setting myself up to be governed by someone else. And so I've spent the majority of my life looking for how I am co-creating, especially the things that I'm furious about, so that I can change it. I can reclaim it. I can bring it back into my own energy field and then decide where do I want to take that. All right. Now, the last question that I have under, so identify the issue that's causing your reaction. What triggers your reaction? What are you most afraid of? Why are you afraid of that? What proof do you have that that's a thing to fear? And the final question is, how would you like this issue to resolve? Because that's the other place that we're really wasting a lot of our beautiful co-creative energy, is we don't have a definite idea of where we'd like to be. We just know that we don't want to be here. I had a boyfriend once, and of course, I'd been doing this work for a while when we started dating, and I said, all right, let's sit down and like, tell me, like, what's the perfect life? What does the perfect life for you look like? And he said, well, I don't know about that, but I can tell you what it doesn't look like. And he proceeded to list off like 25 vehement things that he didn't want in his life. And I started to laugh, and I'm like, you have all those things in your life because look at how much energy you have invested in them. So it's time to pull out of what you don't want and start focusing on what you do want. And I think that what we're suffering from on this planet more than anything is a lack of imagination. We have lost the ability to say, what if we didn't have to work 40 hours a week just to live? What if we didn't have to, what if we didn't have to use fossil fuels? What if there was free energy? What could the world look like? We need to have a lot more of those conversations, particularly because we have failed the younger generations. We are not giving them enough stories to help them through this time. All they're seeing is the world is dying, and we're fighting about petty little shit, like who's going to be our next, leader, whether that's local or national or whatever. But the bottom line is that the entire environment that supports us is in critical meltdown. And so our children are saying, give us some stories that we can get behind. So let's engage our imagination and spend some time thinking about, what do you want the outcome to look like? And then you have to ask yourself, is that outcome based in fear? Is it based in scarcity? Is it based in bigotry? Is it based in judgment? So any issue that you can identify that you have a reaction about and you have some fear about and that you'd like to have a resolution, you have to also ask yourself, where's that resolution coming from in my imagination? Is that resolution story triggered by fear? Is it triggered by judgment? Is it triggered by scarcity? Or is it triggered by trust? Okay, is it triggered by trust? Trust in myself, trust in the people around me, trust in the world, trust in the spiritual help that we're getting right now to evolve beyond these polarizations that we're in. So don't waste your energy on social media. Don't waste your energy. It hurts me to see people saying things like, I can't wait for Donald Trump to die from COVID. It's like, that is not, okay, that's not a conscious thing to say. And to put all of our blame on him for an environment that's global, that is allowing this to happen, is a complete drain of your personal power. And you think that social media doesn't know this? Social media loves, that's what trolls are for. It's like, get people engaged in fighting the tiniest little thing, because then they won't have any energy left to actually visualize and put trust behind a new vision. Okay, so we have to let go of what we think we know right now, and we have to start listening to our emotional intelligence. So what your left brain has learned is, got to have a plan, got to have an action plan with steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, got to follow that action plan or you're not going to get to the end result. Those days are crumbling. And what we are being asked to do now is to simply be, and in the moment, allow our energy body, our emotional body to guide us to right action. And that's a lot harder than it sounds, because this is my work. And I have to tell you that this whole year in lockdown has brought up, like, every addiction I ever had has come back, reared its head. Hey, hi, wouldn't you like to hang out with me again? What else has come up? This anxiety of, like, I'm not doing enough. I have to do. What can I do? And I'd fill out pages of what can I do? And then my body would just go, nope, I have long-term Lyme disease, and I appreciate my Lyme, because what it does is that when I'm going in a direction that is not in my highest purpose, the Lyme just takes me down. Sometimes for a day, sometimes for 3 days, sometimes for 5 days. It depends on how long it takes me to get the message. So this urgency to just get out and take action and do, my body's like, nope, be. This is for you to be. And so it's forced me to go back into looking in the spots I don't want to look at, into, like, my behaviors that I don't want to see, or, deep-seated shame or trauma that I have not yet uncovered and dealt with. This is a time when we are being asked to let go. We're not going back to normal. That's not going to happen. There is no such thing as normal anymore. So the world is crumbling so that we can build something new. So we need to have really good stories about what that could look like. And I'm sure that everybody on this Zoom call has access to those kinds of stories, because that's why you're here. The Lake Harriet spiritual community has always been about, let's tell better stories. Let's tell bigger and better stories. Let's give people somewhere to focus their energy towards evolution and consciousness, okay? But the people around you might not have access to those stories. So it's important for us to learn to be good storytellers, good story keepers, good story minders, that we find good stories and we share those. I went through this period this summer where I was getting all this information and I was so upset about it. And so I kept going to my daughter, because we live together, and finally, she just said, Mom, I can't, please, I don't want to hear any more of this. Like, if you can't tell me something good, then don't talk to me at all. And so I went off and sulked for about a week and didn't speak to her, other than hi and bye and stuff as we passed in the hallway. But I really thought about that, and I was like, she's right. I'm, like, bringing this energy of fear and victimization and all these things that I say I don't believe in, and I'm bringing it right into my house and I'm trying to distribute it. And she's like, no. So I stopped, and then I started looking for the stories that made me happy, the stories that made me inspired, the stories that helped me to be in a place of optimism. And those are the only stories now that I'm allowing to come out of my mouth in my own house. So I would ask you to think about what you're sharing and why you're sharing it. What is the purpose? One of the things I found is that I was sharing my stories because I felt like I no longer had a community. I felt like there was no more community of people who believed in co-creation. Like everybody now, because of COVID, we're all victims of a virus. And I'm like, but I'm not at war with nature, and I'm not at war with a virus, and I'm not at war with my body. So that's not true for me. But to find other people who, I couldn't find anybody who had those same beliefs as me. And so I had a session with one of my healers who lives in Montana, and she said, your local community might no longer be there, but you now are part of an international community because there's a huge international community of people who feel like you do. So you just have to trust that they're there and feel them, but they're not going to be available to you in the same way that your local community was. And that made me feel a lot better to know that there is a global community of people who are very invested in the idea of co-creation, and that we can co-create a world that's really, I don't want to, like, fair is a word that comes up, but more than that, that we wake up every morning happy and excited to go outside and do whatever it is that we do. And that work becomes something that you love, and that money is not the reason we live. Money is not the thing that we focus all our attention on. So, how to be a better activist. This is going to be the next part of my talk. And then we're going to do the offering. So, how to be a better activist. 1, dig deep into your reactions. You've got to know what your triggers are. You've got to know why you're being triggered. And then what's the underlying belief of that triggered. Some possible reasons we're triggered may include, I feel helpless and defenseless. Therefore, my warrior energy is rushing in to slay who's ever threatening me, right? Most of the time that we get triggered, it's because we feel like we can't do something about it. Another reason we get triggered is that feels like a situation of my past where I was hurt. So now I need to protect myself and be hypervigilant. And a third reason why we might be triggered is, since I see no way I can possibly be part of what is happening out there, I am justified to blame, shame, and point my finger. So, dig deep into your reactions. Check yourself. Be honest. Be brutally honest with yourself. This is the hard work we're here to do right now. We're not here necessarily to be out in the streets demonstrating, although that is a fine thing to do if enough of us can do it together. We are here to do the inner work and to face with brutal honesty the things that we have refused to see prior to this. If we're honest and we spend the time to understand our triggers, then we can find out how we're co-creating the very thing that we're against, okay? That allows the personal power to come back into our own field and to be utilized in our own personal life. So keep that energy close, keep it personal. Second thing is find the truth. Every single person's belief has a kernel of truth in it. You got to find it. My brother posted a post on Facebook the other day, and he had a response from his army buddy who was anti-abortion all the way. Like, that was it for him. Like, a woman shouldn't be able to kill a baby. That was it. And so I said, all right, let me just chime in here. And I said, let me give you the context around abortion. And so then I talked about the unfairness of men being able to rape, murder, kill, hurt women without any repercussions, and how that, in particular, women should have the autonomy to decide if they want to carry a child. And not necessarily, I wasn't talking about children of rape, I was just talking about a woman should make that determination, because often men are not present. They leave and leave the woman responsible. Therefore, if the woman is going to be responsible for a child for the rest of its life, she should have that choice. And then I talked about the economics, and that when women make less money and they're not promoted in the same way and they don't have the same opportunities, then again, they have to decide, do I want to take on a child for the rest of its life, knowing that I will be responsible financially and emotionally for this child. And so I gave all these things, and I never once said, you're wrong for thinking the way that you are. What I said is, I understand the kernel of truth in yours. It is not okay to kill anybody. But if that's what you're really against, then I assume that you are out marching for George Floyd and marching for Breonna Taylor and marching for all of the Black people who are being killed without any repercussions. Like you can't pick and choose your truth. It has a context. So once you find the truth, you also have to look for the context. And I think that that is how we're going to be able to converse with people who don't agree with us, is I'll find the truth in your belief, and I'll share the truth in my belief, or you can find the truth in my belief. And then let's build a bridge of conversation about the context of those beliefs and asking those questions. Like my healer in Montana, she said, the white people here are terrified that Black people are going to come and burn their houses down, even though there's no Black people living here. And so then we have to ask ourselves, why do you believe that? What proof do you have that that's a thing for you to be afraid of? You see, so this series of questions that you can ask yourself and then ask others can actually lead to conversations where you can say, if this is the information that you're getting off of the news or off of social media, it may not be true, or only parts of it may be true. So let's focus on what's your personal experience and where's the truth in that. Okay, so once you find the truth and you find what are you both afraid of about that, what's the context, how might you be co-creating the thing that you are fighting against? So that comes with your self-exploration. And then the fifth is keep your actions in your own personal experience. You can't change what's happening out there. You can only change what's happening to you personally. So know that this is a time where we're being asked to pull all of our energy away from social media, away from, the news and the newspapers and the radio shows and all this stuff. Bring it in, look around. Who can I have a conversation with here that might have an impact? And start building those pieces, conversation by conversation. Thank you for listening to me. All right, it's time to do the offering basket. If you've not already done it, let me just look. There's a link in the chat that you can click on, and you can pay any amount that you'd like. And then there's a question here, but it's private, so I'll answer it privately. Okay. Let's see. There's still people coming in, and I'm almost done with my presentation. I do know that they tape this, though. They do record this, so it'll be on their YouTube channel at some point. All right. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like answered publicly? Or if there's somebody who's willing to walk through this process with me, like there's somebody who has a violent reaction about something and they'd like to understand what's underneath it, I would love to do that if anybody would be willing to jump in. Nobody's jumping in. Okay, let me just look and see. Oh, one other thing is, this was something that I was trying to share and then it didn't come up. It helps if you remember that everyone is doing their best from their level of consciousness. Everybody is doing their best from their level of consciousness. So we're not here to shame people because they're not conscious enough. We're here to gently help people raise their consciousness, expand their consciousness. And in order to do that, we have to be doing it ourselves. There's nothing worse than a self-appointed guru who tells you that you're doing something wrong when they are not clear with themselves. We've all probably had a teacher like that at one point in our lives. And one of the things that I always enjoyed about teaching in my workshops was I would tell my people up front, I'm only one step ahead of you. And then I would share stories along the way to show them that indeed I was only one step ahead of them. And that was the single most comment I got at the end of all my workshops, was how much people appreciated the fact that I was so close to them in terms of their evolution. They didn't feel like where I was out of reach. They felt like I was so close they could really just step forward and follow. So anytime you're trying to change somebody's mind or change somebody's opinion or provide information about something, you've got to check yourself first. Why am I feeling a need to do this? Is it because I think they're wrong and I'm right and I want them to come to my side? This was one of the questions I asked the ancestors 2 weeks ago. I said, why are you bringing me all this information if I'm not allowed to share it? And they just smiled and said, you'll see. So I'm like sitting on all this information that I used to just post on Facebook like crazy. And now I'm like, nope, I'm just going to sit on it and see what happens. I'm going to be in the moment and take direction from my body. And that means that I have to reestablish a relationship with my body that's based on trust. And that's been my work and continues to be my work. So, all right, Gary, I think I think that I've done my presentation with what I understood about conscious activism. Is if there's nobody that wants to volunteer to be taken through the process or has no further questions, then I'll respond to this person in private who asked a question, but I think that I'm done. So thank you all for coming today. It's a beautiful day, the sun is shining, and I hope that you got something out of this. It's always one of my prayers when I do a presentation that every person in the room gets whatever they need to hear the most. And I don't know what that is in the whole presentation, but I hope that you got one little nugget that's helpful for you. So the person who asked this question privately, I would like to respond to the ancestor part of this. It was about a fear from previous life or ancestors. This is really important, I think. What I believe is true, based on my own work, is that right now, in order for us to make this ascension, we cannot bring our ancestral wounding with us. And so these generations that are here right now, starting with the few people that are still left from the great generation, the baby boomers, the Gen X, Y, Z, all the way down, we're all here. Part of our job that we agreed to was to transform the ancestral wounding and heal it so that nobody is going into the next part of ascension with any of that. So understand that a lot of these intense feelings that you might be having don't belong to you. It's your ancestral lineage. And I saw a little chart the other day, like how many great-great-grandparents you have. And it's something like 2,000. And I'm like, holy cow, all of that. How many of our ancestors were slaves? How many of our ancestors were burned at the stake? How many of our ancestors were killed? How many of our ancestors were fodder for war? Every single one of us is carrying enormous ancestral wounds that are begging to be released. So in order to do that, you have to work with the ancestors and you have to work with nature. Nature knows how to help you release these wounds. So if you can go out into a quiet spot and sit on the ground, put your feet on the ground, sit on the ground, open yourself up to nature and your ancestors and your spiritual guides and say, show me, tell me, give me an idea of how I can heal these wounds. And they will. It's about being in the moment and being open now versus making a plan and going forth and sending all your energy externally. Okay, thank you.